Okay. Good afternoon to my friends on Facebook and good afternoon to my friends on YouTube. Thanks very much for tuning in today to listen to this little extra Columbus Karma Tixum Choling Dharma talk. My name is Kathy Wesley, and I'm the resident teacher at the Columbus Karma Tixum Choling, a Tibetan Buddhist Meditation Center in Columbus, Ohio. And I know we have had fantastic programs going on the last few days. Yesterday, Lama Tom led us in a shamatha retreat, and then this morning we had our regular practice sessions, and then Eric Weinberg shared with us about the 3 trainings today. But I wanted to just take a few minutes and say hello to you and to tell you I've been thinking about you all week, because it's been, as you can imagine, it's been quite a week for all of us. And so as a result, I thought it would be a good idea for us to get together just for a few minutes this afternoon to share some space together and to talk a little bit about how we're doing and how we're feeling with everything that has transpired this week. Many of you are familiar with the Columbus KTC and our mission to spread love, compassion, and meditation throughout Central Ohio. And we appreciate your being part of that. Today, I think that what's on my mind today is, of course, the attack on the U.S. Capitol building that happened this week on Wednesday, and how difficult this was for us to watch, and how difficult it was for us to feel. And I just wanted to say hello and talk a little bit about it. I know a lot of people have different feelings, and they're feeling somewhat conflicted, and they're feeling somewhat scared, and also somewhat concerned about the future. And so I thought it would be a good idea to just chat a bit about it. I think the first thing to do is to take a deep breath. And so I'm going to have a short session of just sitting, where we do just a little bit of sitting meditation. So let's sit quietly and come to feel our body on our seat. Turn our mind toward our breath, the natural feeling of our breath coming in and out, and just breathe quietly together for just a moment or two. Okay, thanks. And as is usual for our little Dharma talks, I'll start with a short prayer. In the Buddha, his teaching, and the community most excellent, I take my refuge until enlightenment is reached. Through the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may we attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. May all beings be happy and have the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they have that great happiness, which is freedom from suffering. May they come to dwell in great equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. And finally, praying to the masters of our lineage in Tibetan, Palden Sawe Lama Rinpoche, Dagi Chiwar Pe de Den Shala, Kadrin Jimbogun Niche Sunde, Ku Sun Toking Adrip Saldu So. Okay, thanks very much. As the events of this week have shown us, human beings can be either really good or really bad. We're born with what I guess you could call a full set of criminal tools. We could be either good. You can either use our body, our speech, and our mind. We can either use it for good or we can use it for bad. So all of us are in the same situation in this world. The Buddha called this world samsara, or a cyclic existence. And he called it that because it goes around and around and around. And we are often put into a spin by feeling overwhelmed by our emotions. Sometimes we feel overwhelmed by circumstances and situations. And so as a result, we tend to go round and round and round, driven by our habits. We've developed so many habits over so much of our life. And if you believe in previous lifetimes, we've been accumulating habits for a lot longer than the years we've been alive. And these habits sometimes cause us to react with negativity when we feel harmed or threatened, whether it's verbally, physically, or emotionally. So here's our situation. We're in a world that's driven by a lot of habits. We ourselves have habits that then get triggered and enacted. And as a result, we have the capacity to take this situation and either make something wonderful out of it or something terrible out of it. So, in a way, we are all born in extraordinary circumstances and have to then take hold of those circumstances and make use of them. So, that's the bottom line. We can be either good or not good, but we choose to be good. We choose to live out what's inside of us, the love and goodness that's inside of us. And I think that's the first choice as human beings we can make in any situation, is the choice to be good. And by good, I mean the choice to connect with other people, the choice to see ourselves in other people and feel compassion for them, the possibility of using our powers to be of service to others and to help relieve their suffering, because they're going around in samsara too. They're going around in samsara too, and they may not even know they're going around in it. They may just be thinking, I'm having a bad day, or I'm having a bad week, or I'm having a bad life. And so we have to find a way to help them feel encouraged, let them know that there is something beyond what we see. There's something beyond what we think, and that thing that is beyond is basic goodness. In Buddhism, we're a little bit parochial. We call it Buddha nature. Everyone has it. There's not a single one who lacks it. Even the greatest criminal that we can think of or imagine has Buddha nature, has the potential to be good, and has the potential for goodness. And so as a result, everyone is worthy of our caring and respect. Now, you might say, well, what about the criminals? Are you saying that criminals are deserving of our caring and respect? And what does that mean? Does that mean we have to open the jail doors and let all the criminals free? And the answer is no. It means we have to put limits on the criminal's ability to commit crimes. We have to do that. That's a human thing. We have to keep society safe. But what we can choose to do with our own hearts is hate or love. That's always the choice. Disliking something, liking something. And from the Buddhist point of view, love and goodness are part of us. It's what we naturally are. We are basically good. We are all basically good. And because we all have this basic goodness, we feel and are moved by the great things that we see. We're moved by art. We're moved by music. We're moved by literature. We're moved in our hearts to compassion for others, and so on. And so because we want to choose goodness, we want to choose love, we sometimes have a hard time doing it. And so this is why we rely, as Buddhists, we rely on the Buddha as our example. The Buddha was the person who achieved awakening in this lifetime. He brought his goodness and his wisdom and compassion to full fruition in this lifetime. And so as a result, he's the perfect person to call upon. And this is why all of our practices start with refuge. We take refuge from the sufferings of samsara. We take refuge in the Buddha as our teacher, as our example, the person who enacted wisdom and compassion, the person who went up to Angulimala, the terrorist, who was killing people one after another out of a mistaken notion that someone had given him that by killing 1,000 people, he would be master of all of the world. And so he was on person 1,000. In other words, he had killed 999 people and terrorized his region. But he met the 1,000th person when he met the Buddha Shakyamuni on the road. And the Buddha Shakyamuni was able to connect with him through his wisdom and through his compassion. He was able to connect with this person who had himself become somewhat inhuman because of his mistaken notion that by killing others, he would be master of the world. And so this mistaken notion fueled Angulimala. It made him commit terrible, atrocious crimes. But what did the Buddha do? The Buddha was able to look into his heart and see the empty spaces inside it, the empty space that felt powerless, the empty space that needed power and felt that the only way to get power was to subdue others. And the Buddha helped him to see that his real power was in service, love, and restraint. He helped him to see the damage that he had done and all of the people he had harmed, and saw and helped him to see through the lie that he had been told, which he believed so strongly that he killed all of those people. He was even able to help this terrorist, this person who wanted to cause terror and fear. He was able to overcome him by helping him to see his own inner nature. Now, this may be possible in our modern world. It may not be possible in our modern world. But when we see people acting badly, we have to understand it's that they don't know they have basic goodness within them. They don't know it. They're completely ignorant of their own basic goodness and their own capacity to love. And therefore, they look outside of themselves for comfort. They look outside of themselves for approval. They look outside of themselves for meaning, and so on. And this mistake that they make holds them prisoner to these things. And being prisoner to these things, they are helpless to help themselves. And so sometimes that person is another person in our life, and sometimes that person is us. And so this is why, as Buddhists, we start by taking refuge in the Buddha and recognizing that just as the Buddha overcame everything to become enlightened, so too we can gradually do the same. So we take refuge in the Buddha to, I guess you could say, to nurture the very best parts of us. And if, as we take refuge, as you know, anybody who's taken the vow of refuge in the Buddhist tradition knows you renew it morning and evening. And so renewing the vow of refuge in the morning, renewing the vow of refuge in the evening, we at first take refuge in the Buddha as being external to us, but then gradually over time, we become aware of the capacity we all have for Buddhahood and the capacity we all have to become awakened. And in this way, we can slowly, slowly, slowly begin to trust ourselves more and more and more, and eventually take refuge in the Buddha that is the nature of our own mind. And so in this way, it's my hope that by talking a little bit about this today, we can have a conversation about what that means to take refuge. And we take refuge not just once, but again and again and again. And the reason we take refuge in the Buddha, his teaching, and our community over and over again is because those three jewels of refuge, the Buddha, his teaching, and the community, represent the very best of all of us. And as it represents the very best of all of us, then we strive for that. And we fall, And then every day we take it again. And the next day we take it again. And the next day we take it again. And the reason we do this is because we are always falling. We're always making a mistake. And we're always falling into error. And as I have taught out of the book, the Dhammapada, before, and many of you are familiar with the Dhammapada because I've taught it so many times. But if you think about it, some of our worst tendencies are the very first things he talks about in the book. And there's probably a reason why they're the very first things in the book. So it probably wouldn't hurt for us to take a peek at it. I'm using the Thomas Byrom, and that's Byrom translation. I have a very old copy of it from the 80s that was published as a coffee table book. And it begins with this is the words of the Buddha's sayings, the most famous sayings of the Buddha. We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts, and with our thoughts we make the world. Speak or act with an impure mind, and trouble will follow you as the wheel follows the ox that draws the cart. We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts we make the world. Speak or act with a pure mind, and happiness will follow you as a shadow that's unshakable. And so the Buddha recognized from the very beginning that our biggest challenge is our own self-fixation, being fixated on ourselves as being the center of our universe. And being fixated on ourselves as being the center of our universe, sometimes this leads us to feeling attacked when people tell us that something that we think is true is not true. And they feel belittled, and they feel harmed, and so forth and so on. And yet, as hard as we try, we have difficulty accepting the fact that people are different from us. And we try to make them and overpower them and make them like ourselves. And so, and we also can hold a grudge. So the next part of the Buddha's teaching is a quotation from a person who has been harmed, who says, "Look how this person beat me and abused me. Look how they threw me down and robbed me. Live with such thoughts and you live in hate. Look how they beat me and abused me. Look how they threw me down and robbed me. Abandon such thoughts and live in love." Then he says, the Buddha says, "In this world, hate never yet dispelled hate. Only love dispels hate. This is the law, ancient and inexhaustible. You too shall pass away. Knowing this, how can you quarrel?" And I think that what the Buddha is telling us here is that with our thoughts, we make the world. And so if we look at the world outside of us right now and see all of the confusion and suffering that is rampant in our world, it's because people are not, they are not aware that they have goodness within them. And they think that goodness can only be obtained by accumulating things, people, situations, and so on. This doesn't mean that there isn't trouble in our world. There is. We have never yet, in all of these thousands of years of humanity, been able to resolve poverty once and for all. We have never yet been able to resolve situations of prejudice once and for all. But I feel that as human beings, we are gradually moving in that direction. And as we move in that direction, there will be always those who feel threatened by change. And when they feel threatened by change, they will react as this person in the Buddha's teaching example. They think of themselves as being harmed. They think of themselves as being the victim of a grievance, and that they have every right to strike out and to harm others in return. And so even though we may not think we're like this, we get like this. If somebody calls us a name that we don't like, we instantly jump to defend ourselves, and then maybe even call the other person a name. So I think there's a reason why this example of how we can go so wrong and deny our Buddha nature through hatred of another person. It's amazing. It's amazing how we can mislead ourselves. And so in this way, it's my hope that by talking about our Buddha nature and encouraging us to see it in ourselves, that we might be able to see it in others and might be able to find a way to connect with their Buddha nature, just as the Buddha was able to connect to the terrorist Angulimala. This is first in the book because it's the hardest. Our self-identity gets threatened, and then we lash out. And but yet, when we feel that pain of being verbally or emotionally attacked, it's at that painful inflection point that the greatest change can happen for us. It's at that moment when our self-concept is attacked that we can actually make a change. And this change can be made. Everybody knows this. Anybody who's ever practiced any kind of meditation knows when you're sitting and meditating, often a thought will cross your mind while you're meditating. And in the moment you recognize that you're thinking, you actually can label the thought thinking, you can let go of it and let it fall, and then bring your mind back to your breath for a fresh start in your meditation. And if you can do this, this means that you theoretically can drop any thought at any time, anywhere. Now, the reason we find it hard to drop thoughts is because we have so much habit energy behind those thoughts. We have such a habit of reacting negatively when people come toward us in a way that we feel is unkind. And so because of this habit of coming after people again and again, we have the potential to continue to react badly when these things happen. And so what we have to learn how to do is we have to learn how to sit momentarily with our feeling of discomfort. We have to learn how to sit quietly for just a moment with that feeling of discomfort so that we don't instantly lash out. And how can we sit with that moment of discomfort? By using our imagination to imagine that we are sending goodness and love even to those people who are harming us. If we can mentally sit and think of another person, we can mentally sit and think of sending them love. His Holiness the Dalai Lama suggested that people practice this meditation, which is called metta, M-E-T-T-A. They practice metta every day because then when they need it, when they need their loving, compassionate response to people, it will be there for them. So it's if we can sit in that first moment when we feel harmed by something that someone has said to us verbally or something that one has thrown at us emotionally, if we can sit with that moment of discomfort, then we have the potential to sit with just about anything. And we have the potential to, in that moment, switch from thinking, oh, poor me, to, okay, oh, poor me, stop there and change and think about the other person and think about their suffering and think about their feeling small and find a way to connect to that person in that moment that is actually shared between us because they are now where we have been in the past. And because they are where we have been in the past, we can actually appeal to their humanity. And so if we can sit with our discomfort, be with our pain, then we can potentially see and be with the pain of other people. And when we see that the person who is emotionally coming after us, if we can see that person as being hurting and in pain and actually crying out in pain, then this is where we can sort of break open and see beyond ourselves into a different future. We don't always have to do what we always do. We don't have to always do everything we always do. We don't have to react in the same way over and over again. We actually can make a different choice. Those of you who are familiar with the books of the Buddhist nun Pema Chodron know her challenge to practice the three difficult things. The first is to see our mental afflictions our anger, our prejudice, our jealousy as being mental afflictions and not true stories that we have to believe. Every person who has been harmed by somebody else can sometimes work up a grudge in their mind, holding a grudge against someone who they feel caused their grudge. But if we can actually see the grudge as the problem and the habitual tendency to hold that grudge as a problem, then we can begin to make a change. When we begin to feel the pain of the tight grip we put around ourselves and around other people, when we feel the tightness of that grip, we can begin to feel the pain that others feel, and then begin to find ways to imagine opening that, because that's the second difficult thing. The first thing is to see that our ways and patterns of reacting are not helping us. And the second is to make the commitment to do something different. Perhaps instead of yelling back at someone who yells at us, we could just laugh. Perhaps we could turn away. Perhaps we could take that moment and look into their eyes and see their pain. And then the third difficult thing that Pema Chodron talks about is making this our way of life. In other words, we can't just notice our pattern and make the change once. We have to notice our pattern and make the change again and again and again. And by noticing that pattern and making that change again and again and again, this provides us with a new way of life, a new way of life that's about opening up instead of closing down. We have to rely on our strengths. The same book that talks about the 3 difficult things talks about 3 things that we need to take hold of. And one of those is a teacher who can teach us in the ways of goodness and compassion. And we also need to have a workable mind. And we need to have a good spiritual practice. And so having a good teacher is like us taking refuge in the Buddha. If we can find a teacher who can help us to strengthen our good side and to weaken our negative side, this is a good person we need to be around more often. Second, if we also have to have a workable mind, and this is why we need to keep the practice of meditation ever in mind. We have to keep practicing meditation, even when it's difficult. Those of you who are our followers on Facebook of mine, I put a quotation today from Jigme Lingpa, one of the great masters of the past, who said, even if you can't practice your meditation every day, even if you can't practice your spirituality every day, if you can think about it fondly and aspire again and again and again to come back to your spiritual practice and come back to your seat of meditation, this, he said, makes you more wealthy than the wealthiest person in this world, and that we are wealthy in goodness. So if we can see these 3 difficult things, seeing our patterns, maybe writing down the things that punch our buttons, and then number 2, finding ways to move the buttons and finding ways to breathe instead of feeling and jumping immediately to the place of harm, and so forth and so on. This will help us understand why others have a hard time doing it. And then the other thing we can do is that we can begin to look at the suffering of other people and spend a little less time blaming them and a little more time understanding them. Now, I know that this may or may not help with what's happened this week, because after all, what's happened this week is a criminal attack on our way of life, a criminal attack on our system. And so we have to understand and urge all of those who are in positions of power to do what's necessary to ensure the safety of everyone. And so that needs to happen. We have to have a civil society, and we need to have agreed on rules and norms so that we can take care of each other within the framework of compassion and goodness. And we've had this for a long time. And so one day's events may not overturn that. But what we need to look at now is what is beneath that and what is below that harm and violence, which is the need to be understood and to be seen. People need to be seen and they need to be understood. And they don't need to be demonized. So how we have to walk back from this is by noticing our mental habits. First we criticize, then we ostracize, then we marginalize, and then we demonize. It's a human problem. And so what we can do is when we begin to criticize people in our heads, it's not that we should say, oh, that bad person who is acting badly is actually good. We're not being asked to do that. We're being asked to see that their actions are coming from a place of pain within them. And by understanding them, we can pray for them instead of hating them, which is the next step. Criticize, ostracize. And when we see ourselves doing any one of these steps, criticizing, ostracizing, marginalizing, or demonizing, we have to realize that we are harming ourselves with this attitude. We have to see that we are holding ourselves hostage by this attitude. And we're feeling justified in doing it because, after all, we think we're better than other people. But you have to understand that's also what the criminals are thinking, that they're better than other people and that they deserve what other people have. And so what we have to do is we have to see our faults as faults and not see them as benefits and not see them as positive things. And instead recognize them and abandon them. My teacher said that there are 3 ways to abandon a negative attitude when you see one in yourself. He said there are 3 levels of training in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Those of you who are familiar with them know the Vajrayana, the Mahayana, and the Hinayana. But going away from words, because you don't have to understand those words to understand what practice to do. The first one is the Vajrayana practice. He said, if you're very skilled in seeing how your mind is and seeing the basic goodness of your mind, then do that when you're in the midst of feeling something angry and awful. And so if you're in the midst of seeing something angry and awful, and then you can remember your goodness and the goodness of the other person and rest in a place of sacred outlook, seeing the goodness in both, wonderful. But he said, that's hard to do. So since that's hard to do, he said the next best thing is when you begin to feel angry, you think about the damage that your anger has caused you and don't see it as something good. See it as something you need to engage with, not something that you need to stuff under a rug somewhere, but that you need to engage with in the moment. And the best method for engaging was given by the Buddha himself when he said, exchange yourself for others. And so when we think about this practice of just imagining that we're sending goodness to others, this metta meditation, the Dalai Lama said, you sit on your meditation cushion and mentally extend goodness to yourself and mentally extend goodness to others. Do it every day so that you can key into that place of goodness when something difficult hits you, like your own anger. And in the Tibetan tradition, they also teach something called Tonglen, or sending and receiving, where with the thought of Tonglen, you think, I am feeling angry. Angry feelings are painful. And therefore, at this moment, I make the aspiration that I and all beings everywhere are free of anger. And may we become Buddhas in the future, which is the complete freedom from anger. You can add another step to it by saying, may my anger contain the anger of all suffering beings, and may my feeling and working through this moment of anger help me and all other beings work through it as well. And may we all become Buddhas. And my teacher said, now, if you can do that kind of compassion practice, fantastic. He said, but if you can't do that compassion practice, then the very next thing, the third thing you can do when you're suffering from a mental affliction, he said, is to, with conviction, turn away from acting it out as a way of restraining yourself from harming yourself and others. And he said, this, he says, is kind of a blunt instrument, he said, but he said, it is, for many of us, the only thing we can do when we're faced with our own anger is to turn around and walk away. So it's my hope that what we can do in the coming weeks is see our own patterns and begin to abandon our own patterns by seeing the good in other people, sending them love and compassion, and turning away from our own negativity. If we can do those three things, this is going to help us feel better as we go forward, especially if we can catch ourselves criticizing, ostracizing, marginalizing, and demonizing others. If we can catch ourselves doing that and turn away from that behavior, we will have gone a long way to helping ensure goodness continues in the world. So, I think that this is about what I wanted to say today. I can't think of more to say about it, but I am thinking about everyone and I'm doing practice. I've added extra candles to my shrine this week in order to send some goodness out to the world, because the offering of candles, shining light on the Buddhas and so on, is as an offering, is a way of bringing goodness and more intelligence and more knowledge and wisdom into the world. And so I've been doing that this week. And I invite you to do it too. I have electric candles, which is why you see the flashing over there. It's an electric candle that flashes a little bit as it pretends to be a candle flame. And you can do that, and you can offer incense indoors or outdoors this week. Some people have incense allergies, but you can offer incense outdoors and pray for the goodness of the world. And this is a tradition in Tibet, as a matter of fact. Every day, the grandparents of the household get up and they light an incense for the world and make a mental offering to all beings. So I'm going to read one more thing, and that is, do you remember that last part of the Dhammapada where we were saying hate never once dispelled hate, only love dispels hate? This is the law, ancient and inexhaustible. He says, the wind cannot overturn a mountain, and temptation cannot touch the person who is awake, strong, and humble, who masters themselves and minds the law. This is something that all of us can practice. All of us can practice this week, the recognition that love does overcome hate. It did in the past, and it will in the future, and it does in the now. And so it's my hope that this will give you some feeling that you might be able to carry into the week. And for those of you who worry that maybe the world is going down a rabbit hole of badness, a rabbit hole of badness, I do want to reassure you that the teachings of the Buddha say that this world may end up beginning and ending and beginning and ending again. But he says goodness endures. And this is in Shantideva's book, The Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. It's chapter 1, verses 5 and 6, because I feel that they have to go together. As when a flash of lightning rends the night, and in its glare shows all the dark black clouds had hid, likewise rarely through the Buddha's power, virtuous thoughts arise, brief and transient in the world. So he's saying that Shantideva from the 8th century of India is saying that just like a flash of lightning briefly illuminates the landscape, this is how rarely thoughts of goodness arise among humanity. And of course, we might think that's a very depressing thought, but he goes on to say, thus behold the utter frailty of goodness. Except for perfect bodhicitta, there is nothing able to withstand the great and overwhelming strength of evil. Except for perfect bodhicitta, there is nothing able to withstand the great and overwhelming strength of evil. So bodhicitta is 2 types: an understanding of the nature of all things, which is wisdom, and love and compassion. And so by practicing this meditation of metta, love, and compassion, we are strengthening that part of ourselves that can help us get through the next days and weeks of this situation that we're in right now. And so it's my hope that by sharing these thoughts, that this will help you feel encouraged and help you do some meditation practice this week. As soon as I finish my talk here today, I'm going to be looking at the Columbus KTC's chat on Facebook, and I'll answer any questions that you might have in the chat. And I just want to thank you so much for being here today and chatting and listening to our chat. And I hope that you'll take advantage of all of the other videos that are on our YouTube page, Columbus KTC's YouTube page, and also the KTC Facebook page. We're here for you, and we're thinking of you this week. And this coming Tuesday evening at 7 p.m., this will be, I believe it's the 12th, Tuesday, the 12th of January. I'll be leading a compassion chant of the mantra Om Mani Padme Hung for 1 hour, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and we'll be on Zoom. You can find us by going to the columbusktc.org website and click on the virtual shrine room, and then you'll get all of the details that you need, and you'll get our Zoom link. So I'm wishing you all the best today and making prayers that all goes well in your life and it all goes well in our country and with all of the people here. I just read today something that made me feel hopeful, and that is that there are a number of nonprofit groups who are trying to encourage dialogue between people who don't agree politically, and I think that this is a marvelous thing. And there's a group called Braver Angels. As a play on the phrase that Abraham Lincoln used in the Gettysburg Address, the better angels of our nature. And it's called Braver Angels, and they're starting to facilitate talks between people on opposite sides of political divides. So I'll pray for them and pray for all the sentient beings. Let's make an aspiration that through this merit, all achieve the goodness and wisdom that's within them, and they defeat our common enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may we free all beings. May we free all beings. May we free all beings. Okay, thanks very much. And we'll see you again soon. Bye to my friends on Facebook.